Okay, so thanks everyone for joining me today for Artex Academy webinar on What Aren't You Seeing? Troubleshooting and Barn Challenges. So I'm just going to do a little bit of housekeeping before I get going. There will be a Q&A at the end of the presentation, so please feel free through this webinar to submit your questions through the Q&A chat, and we will answer them at the end. And we will also be sending you out a link of this webinar at the end of next week. Sorry, at the beginning of next week. All right, so who am I? So my name is Sue Hagenson, and I am the Senior Dairy Specialist for Artex Barn Solutions. My passion is ventilation and cooling strategy designs. Originally, I'm from New Zealand, and before moving to Canada and Artex, I was an Artex customer in China. I worked for Fonterra Dairy Farms, and I managed a 3,000 cow farm, and also was involved in the design, build, and startup of 6 dairy farms whilst working in China. So I think one of the unique aspects of me is that I was a customer, and so I have a good appreciation of what the company is about. So moving into it, a lot of people talk about cow comfort and natural environment. Here we can see a nice picture of cows doing their thing in pasture. When we think about barns, free stalls or otherwise, we need to think about where and how she's going to lie down, get up, and move around. What we need to remember is that there is nothing natural about housing animals. And as soon as we house cattle, we are making a conscious decision to modify their behavior, good, bad, or otherwise. So when you walk into a barn, what do you want to see? What should you be seeing? So ultimately, we want to see most of our cows either resting or eating. Some of the cows are standing in their stalls, but they need to be standing with all 4 feet. Walking through this section of the barn, we can see just that, with 3 to 4 cows perching. In the most comfortable free stall barns, you won't see many cows standing in the stalls. Most of them will be lying down. However, we do also see this, where cows are standing and or are not lying in the stalls. And this is a signal that there is a problem in our barn. And why is it important to have comfortable cows? Well, it is all about profitability. We have the barn, if we have the barn environment right and all our cows are resting, they will make more milk, and that in turn turns into more profitability or more income per cow. We know that there are a lot of costs if we get it wrong. So cows don't make as much milk as they could. We lose money through higher incidence of lameness. Our animal health costs go up. Cows don't stay in the herd as long. We have a higher percentage of involuntary cows. It takes longer to get a cow and calf, and our labor costs increase as our staff are spending more time tending to sick cows, so we're needing to employ additional labor so that we can just get through our day-to-day tasks. This all leads to reduced animal well-being, and in today's economic climate, we need to provide our cows with the best possible environment, not only the cow, but also for our discerning customers. So let's dive into it. The subject I was asked to speak to, I could go on for days and days and days. And as we don't have that amount of time, I'm just going to look at what I call the big ticket items. So free stalls, feed bunk, airflow, and cooling. And one of the cool things that I get to do and that I love to do is I get to go out and troubleshoot barns. And there is nothing more satisfying than to go out on farm, identify the problems, provide the solution, and see the results once they've been implemented. But before we can do that, we actually need to see what the possible problems are. We have to figure out what the dairy cow is about. And we need to know that she is a workaholic. There are certain components of the cow's day which are fixed. For example, if we've got a cow in a free stall, our cow needs to eat on average 4.5 hours per day. that varies based on competition at the feed barn. She also needs to drink water, and she's going to spend approximately half an hour a day in and around the water trough. She has to be milked, and so she is going to be spending on average approximately 3 hours per day outside of the resting area. Again, these all vary based on circumstances. Our cow also needs to lie down for 12 to 14 hours. And why is lying down important? So lying down increases the blood flow to the udder, which promotes more milk production, and lying down also decreases animal health issues. And the biggie is lameness. If the cow is resting, she's off her feet, she's not standing in dirty alleyways. Time budgeting is a concept that is really easy to grasp, but a lot of farmers don't truly understand it. They dismiss it. They think that, you know, my cows are doing great. I'm doing 32, 35 liters per day. I don't need to make any more milk. Well, there's been a number of studies, but in this on-farm case study that I pulled out, Matsky observed the effect of cows being away from the barn 3 hours versus 6 hours per day. And as you can see, with the cows being away for only 3 hours a day, we got 2 extra hours of lying down time, and that gave us an additional 2 kilos of milk per cow per day. With our heifers, we got an extra 4 hours lying down time. And so what that did is that enabled those guys to make an extra, well, almost 4 liters per cow per day. So it truly does demonstrate that there is a positive effect by reducing time away from the pen, and by being able to maximize the resting times for the cow. So cows and their behavior tell us a lot about what's going on in our barns. The most obvious behaviors being around whether or not we have our free stalls correct. The images in front of you are examples of what cows are telling you, what they don't like about their free stalls. What we need to understand is what is wrong and what are we going to do to improve the stalls so that we get them lying down in them. Everything about free stall design and dimensions is a trade-off between cow comfort and cow cleanliness. We obviously want to maintain both. However, we tend to focus too much on one, and therefore the other one suffers. And by that I mean we get so hung up on stall cleanliness that we end up with really clean stalls, but that is due to reduced occupancy because the cows do not want to lie in them because they have now become the most uncomfortable stall. As we all know, not all free stalls are created equal, and we see a lot of different problems. Some of us have older barns built for the historical cow. She was smaller in stature compared to today's cow, and we're now trying to squeeze her into the smaller stall. Not very comfortable. We also have situations where the stalls are too big. So in this example here, you can see that the dimensions are wrong. The shoulder bar is too high and our cows are walking right through the stall. And we also have situations where stalls are broken. So we've now created the double wide bed for our cows. And also there are situations where we have created stalls that have become too flexible. So when we see these behaviors, it doesn't matter which one it is, we do actually need to determine what is wrong. So in the top left picture, you can immediately see what the issue is, but can you identify the issue on the right? Well, I usually find that by grabbing a tape measure and going out and measuring the stalls to identify the problem is always the best solution. I mean, it's really important to do so as the problem may only be a couple of centimeters difference between the cow lying in the free stall or not. So, and it's not difficult to find correct dimensions. I mean, this is a chart that Artex uses. And as you can see, it shows the dimensions for all classes of dairy animals. There are others available. However, I do throw a word of caution as there's still a lot of out-of-date information available on the internet. So you really need to check that the information you are going to use is current. A really fun factor is getting the size of the FreeStore right is really important, particularly for your biggest cow. So we've got to target FreeStore size for the big girls. So a big cow is never going to be comfortable in a stall which is too small for her to lie in. However, a small cow is always going to be comfortable in a stall too big for her. So it's always important to size the stall for the bigger cow. And as you can see on our chart and on a number of other charts, we do have the animals' weights there. So if you have animals that are slightly bigger, then you can use your FreeStore dimensions based on weight of animal. So, as I said, small cows fit comfortably in big stalls, and here's a classic example of a little Jersey sitting really nicely in the stall, which is clearly too big for her. And yes, you may have a few extra manure patches on the edge of the stall, but you know, is that really a bad thing if you can get all your cows lying down? So other things that we can measure to identify cow comfort is cow hygiene. So how clean the cow is. Hygiene scoring is a pretty simple system. I mean, it's a 1 to 4 range where 1 is a clean cow and 4 is a dirty cow. You should be aiming for less than 10% of your herd being in that 3 to 4 range. And this is really achievable. And why do we not want to see dirty cows in our herd? Well, really simple. There is a direct relationship between cow hygiene and somatic cell count. So if you look at the graph where Y is the proportion of cows with an udder score of 3 to 4, and X is the bulk somatic cell count, as you can see from the graph, as the number of dirty cows increases, so too does your bulk somatic cell count. So this may all sound really obvious. However, cow hygiene is super important and it needs to be addressed. I recall being on a farm where the cows were incredibly dirty. In fact, the udder on the right was one of these cows. And the farm was having horrendous problems with mastitis. So instead of addressing the cow cleanliness problem, they were busy investigating an animal health remedy to solve their somatic cell problem. Another measure to determine the response to the cow's environment is Haq Scoring. So Haq damage is a dead giveaway as it gives us great insight on stall surface and or where the cow is preferring to rest. If we have it right, then we shouldn't see any or very little damage to the cow's hock. And as I mentioned, this has a lot to do with the stall surface, which leads us on to bedding. So when we look at bedding options, deep bedding, the majority of the time we don't see hock damage. The level of bedding material in a FreeStore is super important. So in the study carried out at the University of British Columbia, they simply added different amounts of bedding into the same FreeStores. And these were mattresses. What they discovered is that by simply increasing the amount of bedding in the same FreeStore, they had a significant impact on the amount of time the cows lay down in the stalls. So by increasing their bedding from 0 to 7.5 kilos or 16.5 pounds, they gained an extra hour of lying down time. So if we look at FreeStore bedding and the management of it, there should be a lot of bedding in the FreeStores, and our stalls should look like this. So lots of bedding. It shouldn't look like this, where there is not enough bedding. So although they were using deep bedding, it's not being well managed. There isn't enough bedding in the stalls. The cows are lying inside the stall. And so you will see that you'll start to get injuries as the cow continues to maintain contact with the concrete. They shouldn't look like this either, where other materials are being used in the bed to minimize the amount of bedding material which needs to be added. Nor should it look like this. In fact, this is not a mattress. This is not comfortable. If you did the knee drop test, I'm really certain that you would have difficulty getting up and you wouldn't be able to walk properly. And this has to be avoided. If using mattresses, invest in good ones. As we saw, increasing the lying down times is super beneficial to your bottom line. One of the other impacts is dirty alleyways. And dirty alleyways give us dirty stalls, which gives us dirty cows. So regularly cleaning the alleyways and the beds is super important to ensure that we keep our cows clean. Alleyways and beds should be cleaned when the cows go to milk. So when working for Fonterra, our cows were milked 3 times a day. So we would clean the stalls and the alleyways three times a day. Slightly different when you have a robot barn because your cows aren't disappearing en masse, but it's still easily manageable. So let's look at the bling, right? The FreeStore, and let's understand the importance of the dimensions and the role of the components, as this is half the battle towards getting it right. The shoulder bar. So the shoulder bar positions the cow. The cow enters the stall, she sees the shoulder bar, she stops and she lies down. The shoulder bar also prevents or preserves the lunge space. The brisket pipe. The brisket pipe positions the cow as she lies down, and it also discourages her from moving forward while she is resting. I see a lot of this where people have got aggressive with the shoulder bar, pushing it to the back of the stall, making the bed shorter, thinking that they are going to stop the cows from lying too far forward in the stall. This doesn't happen, as we know. This is not the function of the shoulder bar. What happens is it pushes the cow back so she can't stand with all fours in the stall, and so we see more cows perching. What they should have happened is that the brisket pipe should have been moved. There is also the great debate over this, even within Artex, as to whether or not a brisket pipe should be used. Yes, not having a brisket pipe provides less restrictions. However, without them, cows tend to sit too far forward, potentially resulting in dirtier cows, which, as we know, increases the somatic cell count. My personal preference is to have a brisket pipe. So when working at Fonterra, this is all I knew. And when you get the positioning correct and you aren't impacting on the cow's comfort, and you can maximize the cow cleanliness, you just get this beautiful picture here of everybody doing what they should be doing. You do see some farms doing this. So they're using the bedding as a brisket pipe. They're piling the bedding up in the front of the stall. In instances like this, there is such a thing as too much, and the pile of sand is now obstructing her lunge space. She's not necessarily lying very comfortable, and it also has the potential of lowering the height of the shoulder bar, which is going to create another set of problems. As I call it, a pipe or a rounded locator is always the preferred option. It allows the cow to lie naturally. You can see that these cows either have their front legs over the pipe or they're lying over the pipe. And this is not something which can be done comfortably if we're using a board or anything that has, which is sharp edged. The other point to note is the height of the pipe. It is, if it's too high above the stall, as you can see on the right, then we have now obstructed the lunge space. We've made the stall too short. Our cows have become more dirty, and as you know, that's going to create a somatic cell problem. So you need to have the pipe visible, and the height varies based on the age of the animal, but for cows, I like to see it no more than 100 to 120 millimeters above the bed, so that's something between 4 and 5 inches. So I often hear my cows won't lie down. And perching happens almost always when the height of the shoulder bar is wrong or the stall is too short. Either the shoulder bar or the brisket pipe is too aggressive. the majority of the time, the cause is the shoulder bar. Yes, heat stress can factor into this. However, the only way to solve the mystery is to go get your tape measure. This problem is an easy fix. You can either lift the shoulder bar up or move it forward to allow more room in the stall for the cow. And so why is perching a bad thing? Well, she's standing with all her weight on her back feet. She's in the alleyway, so she is also standing in wet and dirty surface. And so this is definitely going to increase lameness problems and also foot rot. And so moving on to feed rails, you get to see similar problems. In a lot of instances, there are cows which have damaged necks from the feed rail bar. So you can see in these photos where there are abrasions on the neck and or the neck rail is pushing onto the cow's neck. These are all problems which have a negative impact on dry matter intake. So there's a lot of things we may not see or realize when it comes to feed rails. Okay, the dominant cow gets to flex their level of authority a lot more when there is a feed rail. So in this video, there are a couple of things that I want you to watch. I want you to watch the behavior of the cow in the green square. Okay, you can see that she will be busy pushing her way down the feed bunk. But I also want you to look at the waiting cows. So in situations where we have more we have more animals than we have feed space, we end up with the animals at the bottom of the social pecking chain are going to be the ones that have to wait the longest to get to the feed bunk. And so these are the animals that are going to be spending less time lying down or less time eating. So both of which have negative impacts on dry matter intakes. There is also a greater opportunity for bullying. So although on this farm they've added the tie stall loops to control the space allocation, being open, it's also allowing bullying to take place. So again, this is not a pleasurable experience, particularly for the shy cow. And so she again is going to reduce her time at the feed bunk. Also, you can see here that cows are standing sideways. So why is she standing sideways? She's having to do this to be able to reach the feed, as the height of the bottom rail is too low and the top rail is not out far enough from the feed curb. So it's really restricting her ability to reach the feed. This is a really simple fix. It's a matter of lifting the feed rail up and possibly pushing the feed rail out. However, there is another issue that farms do face, and that's when it comes to different sized cows. Again, the neck rail, like the shoulder bar, needs to be positioned for the bigger cow. So there are times when the smaller cows can easily get out of the pen and simply walk around. And in this, when we have scenarios like this, where the animals can't be grouped by size or by age, the alternatives are either a sloped feed rail or headlocks. Okay, so moving on to one of my favorite topics is heat stress, or ventilation and cooling more so. Sometimes, something that we all need to be mindful of is that heat stress is a global problem. Climatic factors are among the first and crucial limiting factors to the development of animal production when the weather warms up and or we're farming in hot climates. We need to remember that cow behavior and performance are impacted at a THI of 68. So based on the cow production and the genetic gain, this number is now being challenged, deemed to be a little bit out of date, and that mild heat stress is happening at a lower THI. So absolutely, it's the case for cows which are making more milk, because those guys are eating more, and so they are the ones that are going to be getting hotter sooner. The most important thing to remember is fans, soakers, or high pressure fogging only work if they are turned on and or there is sufficient electricity or water to operate them as intended. Sounds silly, however, I have been in barns where it's hot and the fans are not running, or I've been in barns where not all the fans are running because they don't have enough electricity. So there is a huge return on investment when we install fans and cooling, and we need to remember that physically cooling cows has the greatest impact on dry matter intakes and milk production. Nothing else does. And we can't forget our other animals. So our dry cows, and there's a whole webinar all on its own that we would go through on this. However, we don't have time today, but dry cows, we absolutely have to make sure that we are cooling them in times of heat stress. Holding yards, again, super, super important, as this is the hottest place on the farm due to the really high stocking density. And based on where you live, you can't forget your young stock. So we know that ventilation rates are critical and they impact on cow productivity. Air movement in the stall helps cows to lose the heat and allows them to rest during hot weather. So when a cow is in heat stress, it has a negative effect on her resting behavior. And in this trial here, we've got data that's looking at a 6-day period for 30 cows in a FreeStore barn. Each day it got hotter, and as you can see, each day the lying time dropped from 10 hours per day down to 6. So over a period of 6 days, we lost 4 hours of lying down time, which, as we know, has a negative impact on milk production. Now, admittedly, the industry has mixed messages regarding target airspeed. Each climate and region does require a different strategy. And for the regions I work in, I'm always striving for a minimum average airspeed of 3 meters per second. Now, I believe that Nigel Cook is going to be talking about this in his adult cow ventilation webinar on July 24th. So we'll cut it there. So fans, as I said, extremely beneficial. The strategy being that we want our cows to lie down for as long as possible. So the airspeed needs to be targeted where the cows lie down and at the feed bunk. Fan position is dependent on the climate and the fan, as the goal is airspeed. And as I said, in my climates, I'm targeting 3 meters per second, so that's around 7 miles per hour over the cow. So the spacing and the positioning of the fans is always based on what the fan can do. So gone are the days where the rule of thumb has been fans should be spaced at 10 fan diameters apart, as this no longer meets the goal of providing enough airspeed to the resting cows. Now, why do I say that? Well, cows are more sensitive to heat stress. We need the air to move faster, and motor size plays a big role on the fan's capability. So a 72-inch fan with a 1 horsepower motor, if we space that at 60 feet apart or 18 meters, it is not going to be able to achieve the target airspeeds. Physically impossible. So this is an ideal scenario where we have bigger fans over the FreeStores providing fast air over the width of the stalls and a row of smaller fans over the feed lane, with the angle of the fans positioning or the angle of the louvers set to ensure that the fan is aimed at the bottom of the next fan. And as you will note, that there is also a feed lane soaker there too. Now, the reason why I say bigger fans down the FreeStores is that it helps reduce the number of fans that we need in the barn, which then means less fans need to be maintained. So I'm halving that number of fans, or I'm at least halving that number of fans down my FreeStores. If using smaller fans, we need to see a row of fans over each of the FreeStores and a row of fans down the feed lane. There are a lot of mistakes that we can make. So picture on the left, you can see that smaller fans have been used, but they're not over each row of FreeStores. In fact, these fans are staggered, and there are not enough fans down the feed lane. Well, actually, there's not fans down the feed lane. I apologize. The picture on the right, there are only fans down the feed lane. So there is nothing at all over the FreeStores, which means my cows are not going to lie down in those stalls for very long. Another mistake I commonly see is the wrong solution is provided. So the picture on the left shows multiple ventilation options in the barn. And you can see that there are a lot of cows standing and they are bunching. So it's difficult to see from this photo, but between the HVLS fans where there is no airspeed, there aren't any cows. So we had cows bunching around the circumference of the fan where we're getting some airspeed. The picture on the right shows the new strategy, whereby the objective was to provide an even airspeed right across the pack, so beneficial not only to the cows, but also to pack management, as this was a compost barn. And as you can see, the cow's behavior is incredibly different, whereby they are all lying down and they're evenly spaced through the pack. So we're not really seeing any bunching. Other mistakes seen is placing fans hard up against the inlet wall or the ceiling. So picture on the left, we have a fan hard up against the wall, no natural air coming into the fan. The fan cannot operate effectively. Simple solution is to make an opening in the wall. The picture on the right is an example of the wrong solution provided. So the fan is too big or the roof height is too low. And the inlet is blocked. And as you can see that there is a distinct black ring on the roof as the fan is working really hard to try and draw the air through. So simple solution is, if possible, lower the fan to allow a bigger inlet, or if not, the not so simple solution is use a different fan. Fan maintenance. So by not cleaning our fans regularly, we lose fan efficiencies. Fans should be cleaned on a regular basis. And with the case of these dirty fans, we are losing performance. So clean or dirty, our fans cost the same amount to buy. They also cost the same amount to run. Actually, the poorly maintained fans are probably going to cost us more to run. And the kicker is that they won't be running as efficiently. So we're not getting the full performance. So if fans are being poorly maintained, then we are losing 20 to 50% of their performance capacity. So it's super, super important to follow the fan maintenance requirements as per your fan manufacturer. Soaking is important, okay? When the temperature gets to a certain level, fans stop cooling cows well. And this is where we need to add water and be able to provide evaporative cooling. The most effective way to do this is to directly cool the cow. And effective cow cooling is achieved when we use a combination of soaking or wetting the cow's skin, and we expose her to fast moving air. We need to wet the cow to her skin, right? That wet cycle has to be long enough so that we are soaking the skin, but not so long that we have got water running off her back and coming around and under her stomach and onto her udder. The dry cycle is super, super important, as we want to draw the heat off the cow and we need to dry the cow. So you're not going to be as effective if you just use water without fans. And larger water droplets are also really important, as those water droplets will soak into her skin a lot quicker. So we're going to use less water. And to state the obvious, we actually have to cover the cow And as you can see, my jersey here is doing a great job of showing where we need to soak her. So we need to get her from the shoulder all the way down to the rump. Okay. What I see a lot of is poorly designed soaker systems. So people don't necessarily understand the function of the soaker system. The common problems that I see is the pipe is too small. So pipe size is super, super critical to get the required flow rate based on the nozzle and the spacing of the nozzle. Soaker pipe too high off the ground is another issue. So we're not as effective. We get a lot more wind drift when our soaker pipe is too high and when our nozzles are at the incorrect angle. The other one is that if our soakers are running for too long or not long enough, we are either not effectively soaking or we are over soaking the cow, and then we run into other potential problems like mastitis. And if we don't use fans down the feed lane, then we aren't going to be able to provide that drying time. So as you can see here from the picture on the left, we've got the soaker line, and in my opinion, that line is just a little too high for my liking. And you can clearly see that I've got the angle of the nozzles incorrect, and the water is absolutely missing the cow. So it's going completely over here, and we aren't really doing a very good job wetting the cow. As you can see, the picture on the left, the soaker line is a lot closer to the cow, so it's just above the control rod of the headlocks, and our soaker nozzles are better angled, and they're actually angled to wet the cow. So our cows are our biggest investment, and yet we ignore them the most. So watch what your cows are telling you and go into your barns with your tape measure and your wind speed measure or meter to figure out what is wrong. At the end of the day, when you get it right, your business becomes more sustainable and a lot more profitable. So I hope that this helps provide some insights. What are the potential problems in the barns that you work with? And if you don't already have it, here are my contact details. And I would be more than happy to share any further information with you. And Karen, if we have time, I am happy to take questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Sue. We actually do have 2 questions. I'm going to get the people who asked them to ask in person. So the first is Paul Willems. And if you give me just a moment, sir, I will allow you to talk. And
yes, hello. Good evening. Good afternoon, I think, for you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, I got a question for you, Sue. About a waived shoulder bar or neck rail. I was just wondering what your opinion is about that one, because we tend to see I'm based in the Netherlands,
yes,
and we tend to see quite a few of these waived shoulder bars or neck rails in our dairy barn facilities, and I think it's pretty common in Northwestern Europe. So I was wondering what your opinion is about them, if you know them, and if you do come across them in North America and Canada. So
it is a very European. I will say that, but I mean, a lot of those stalls or those barns are older, and like I said, if you've got a situation where your cows have got a lot bigger, I mean, that is one solution to lifting up the shoulder bar. I mean, again, it's the great debate about anything that you add or subtract into your barn, because dairy farming is very subjective. If you like it, you're going to make it work. I'm a purist, and if I'm going to be designing a FreeStore from scratch, I'm going to make sure that I have all the dimensions correct, so I don't need to have one of those curved shoulder bars, because effectively I've just lost a bit of a visual aid to stop the cow, and I'm not necessarily going to preserve my lunge space as well as I could if I had what I'll call a standard or a straight shoulder bar. But again, it works well for some people, and I'm not going to discredit it at all. But I do know that you do have a few kind of, you know, limitations around. I don't get as much preservation on my lunge space as I could if I had a straight bar.
No, totally agree. And we see with new barns being put up for the past couple of years, they've been adding these waived shoulder bars as well. It doesn't make sense in my opinion. So I totally agree with you. But well, since it's out there and people liked it in their FreeStore barn from the 70s or the 80s, they might as well put it in their new 2020 FreeStore barn. So that's what I think is going on. So, okay, thanks.
No problem.
Thank you very much, Paul. The next person is, I'm going to pronounce this incorrectly and I'll apologize in advance. Marcin?
He's muted, Karen.
He is, and he can unmute at any time. You should be able to speak, sir.
Is it working now?
Yes, thank you.
Hi, Sue. The question about the feed bunk and the feed neck rail.
Yes.
We have it very high, but how can we reduce that they put the front legs in the feed?
Well, and that's the problem, right? As I mentioned, when you have to size a rail to allow your biggest cows to not be penalized with able to access the feed and or become injured. You'll have some cows that are going to stick their legs out in front, or, you know, I've been in barns, and on our farm it was a big issue with our young stock, is you'd come into the barn in the morning and there was one or two animals kind of having a lovely time down the feeding alleyway, and everybody else was kind of bellowing in protest. So that really, I mean, there's a couple of solutions aside from the slope feed rail or the headlocks. Is there's another option out there where it's the feed rail, instead of it being fixed, it's mounted on a pivot or a hinge with chains to ensure that the cow doesn't push the rail out too far. So it might be a little bit lower for the bigger cow, but it's has enough ability for that cow when she puts her head through to lift it up, so she can access the feed without any issue and without any injury. And your shorter cows can't actually put their legs through and or get out of the pen.
Okay, thanks.
Unfortunately, I didn't have a picture of that. So, but, you know, I can, if you want to send me an email, I can share with you what that looks like. So if you haven't seen it before, that's an opportunity to try and stop that behavior.
Yeah, okay, I will do that. Thanks.
No problem.
Thank you very much. We still have time for a question or two more. If you do have one, if you want to raise your hand, then I will unmute you. While we wait, I'll just let you know that on June 12th, we have our next presentation, which is going to be Indoor Feed Production, the Future for Sustainable Dairy. This is going to be held with the Hydro Green team, and we're really looking forward to it. All right. I don't see any more questions, so I'm going to say thank you very much for joining us. I will send out a link to the presentation on Monday, and I'll also include Sue's contact information so that you have that on hand if you have any other questions. So thank you very much, everyone.
All right, thanks everybody for joining. And again, feel free to contact me if you've got any questions or you need some help with anything. I mean, I did touch on this quite lightly because I did have a very limited amount of time, but there is a whole lot of additional information that I didn't dive into. But yeah, like I said, if you are needing some help, I'm here waiting, happy to do so.
Thank you, everyone.